Dead by Daylight has two roles, survivors and killers, and there are 41 unique killers in Dead by Daylight at the time of recording this video. And with so many killers, some are bound to be better than others. So in this video, I will be ranking every killer in Dead by Daylight from worst to best. I'll be ranking these killers primarily based on strength, however I will be highlighting certain advantages and disadvantages of each killer. So if anyone is watching this video to try and decide which killer is best for them, they can have an idea on what playstyle might suit them the best. I'll also be highlighting my personal favourites just for people who are interested in that too. Also, please be mindful that this list is entirely my own opinion. So be aware you and I may have different opinions, but feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to discuss, just be respectful please. But anyways, with that, let's get into the ranking. So in dead last, we have the Skull Merchant. For anyone who actually plays Dead by Daylight, this is a completely unsurprising pick for our lowest spot. Skull Merchant is just fundamentally the single worst designed killer in the entire game, basically being only good for holding 3 gens and camping and having absolutely nothing else going for her. And to be honest, she's not even that good at what she's meant to be good at. In fact, the only time I think she can win is either if she plays in a really toxic way to guarantee a win, or is playing against complete noobs who have no idea how to play the game. I'm not the best survivor, I make really stupid decisions, but 9 times out of 10, Skull Merchant is just an M1 killer. Her drones do something. To be completely honest, besides giving undetectable and damaging someone if they get triggered within her drone radius 3 times, I generally do not know how she works. However, I do know that she is horrible to play against, horrible to play as, and is honestly so weak that she makes these so-called weak killers look strong. Skull Merchant is by far the worst killer in the entire game, and to be honest, it's not even close. Her perks are also just not that good and very situational, with Thwack providing some usage, but even still, they aren't that good at all. Honestly, if you play Skull Merchant, you only play her because you think she's hot, and I wish I was kidding. Next up, we have the first ever killer added to Dead by Daylight. And yes, the second worst killer in the entire game is the first killer they ever added, and that is the Trapper. Trapper has not aged well when you look at the grand scheme of things. I mean hell, look at the most recent killer and tell me that Trapper is on a similar power level. Trapper has definitely been left behind, however there's still a lot of fun and even potential to be had with Trapper. His power is very basic, just placing bear traps and survivors may fall into them. It's definitely not a very strong power, especially considering that you have to go around and collect your power first. It's definitely enough to make him the weakest, but what makes him above the Skull Merchant? Well, truth be told, Trapper's traps are a lot more effective than Skull Merchant's drones, and they can even get the best of the best. Plus, there's a lot of fun setups you can do, and Trapper himself is actually a lot of fun. Although getting value out of him and actually consistently winning requires a ton of skill. In my opinion, nothing in this game is more satisfying than having a survivor actually step into your trap, especially if you set it up right and manage to lure the survivor into the trap yourself. Trapper also has some decent perks, with Brutal Strength and Agitation being very strong perks with certain builds, and Agitation being a personal favourite of mine to pair with Pain Resonance. However, in terms of strength, Trapper unfortunately is just absolutely weak as hell, and really has absolutely nothing working with him, with completely outdated mechanics holding him back in today's meta. Like, honest to god, why can Trapper step into his own traps? This is so stupid. The first of the stealth killers, and the weakest one, has to go to Ghostface, which, like Trapper, is sad to see, because Ghostface is a really cool killer, and one I really enjoy facing even though I personally suck at versing him, even though his power is just M1 killer but he can stalk you for insta-down. However, despite that, I am well aware of how weak this killer is. Ghostface can stalk you and get you into an exposed state where he can instantly down you. However, all it takes is a coordinated team and a horrible map, and he literally has nothing. And on top of that, he can be kicked out of his power quite easily, even by people that he's just hooked or down, which again feels a tad outdated. To be honest, his real strength comes from catching people off guard, since he is arguably the stealthiest stealth killer in the entire game, and has personally caught me and my friends off guard so many times. Of course, he can still be really good if played right. However, the difference between Ghostface and a killer like, say, Michael Myers is that Ghostface has almost nothing in chase to actually make him worthwhile. He's just an M1 killer who can stalk you until you are insta-down. However, it's only on a specific person, so it's a lot easier for survivors to defend themselves by taking protection hits or revealing him, which does reduce him into the dirt. In fact, I would argue that Trapper can be a better killer at times. However, I would say that Ghostface has some strengths keeping him afloat, and he definitely isn't unfun, and if you enjoy that stealth playstyle, Ghostface is one of the best options, since he is, in my opinion, one of the best at remaining hidden from others. But he's not that good overall. However, despite that, Ghostface does have some pretty cool perks in the form of I'm All Ears and Thrilling Tremors. He's got some decent perks to make up for the fact that he isn't all that good. Michael Myers recently got a rework, and the big question is, did it make him better or worse? And the answer, in my humble opinion, is that they made him more balanced. His base kit ability is slightly stronger, but he no longer has the insanely OP add-ons that made him terrifying. And while some people would say that this is a good thing, I actually really liked the OP add-ons, as it made Myers one of those killers where you just didn't know what kind of Myers you were facing, which in my opinion made him a lot more interesting, and even a tad stronger, since you not only need to learn how to counter base Myers, which isn't that hard, but every type of Myers. For what he is now, his ability is pretty much that he can either stalk you or chase you, and if he stalks you for long enough, he can instantly down you with a charge attack, or as everyone else has been calling it, a dash ability, which is just an iconic Michael Myers thing, right? I remember that scene in the movie where he dashes at you. Anyways, in terms of strength, in my opinion, he is just ever so slightly higher than Ghostface in terms of strength, mainly because his insta-down ability can work on all survivors, not just the one you mark. Plus, he now has an ability that can help him a lot in chase, although I don't think that he is that strong overall. His perks are fine, Save the Best for Last is really good on certain killers, and Play of Your Food isn't bad, but his perks aren't incredible. To be honest, I think that Myers just got a little bit left in the dirt, and he's no longer the scary stealth killer and is just a slightly stronger M1 killer, but I don't think that he's that good, and in fact I find him very unfun and quite mid, which is a shame to see for such an iconic horror movie icon. Now, originally when making this list, I was confidently gonna put Dredge below Trapper, and although part of me still feels that way, the truth is that Dredge has a lot higher potential than Trapper, and his ability can make him very scary and strong. However, Dredge is, in my opinion, the single most map dependent killer in the entire game, since his entire ability is based on if he has access to lockers, which in my humble opinion, don't spawn as often as you think. And this is coming from someone who mains Huntress. Speaking of Huntress, one of Dredge's perks, Darkness Revealed, is a favourite of mine, and I like him for that. But in terms of the killer himself, he can teleport to lockers, and will passively make the map really dark, which makes survivors blind. But to be honest, his real strength is the lockers, but again, if there's no lockers, there's no power. And on top of that, you can lock lockers, so you can't even get out fast enough for it to be meaningful. Now, Dredge does have anti-loop in the form of the Remnant, but honestly, it still doesn't do that much, and honestly, I also think that he just isn't any fun at all. If you do like Dredge, props to you, but personally, he is one of my least favourite killers in the entire game. However, he isn't my absolute least favourite. Trickster is my personal least favourite killer in Dead by Daylight, even though I really like his lore. I think him and his survivor had a lot more potential, but more on that in a bit. Trickster's power is quite literally throw tiny knives and throw tiny knives faster. Trickster is actually a tad strong, specifically in chase, since if the survivor can't block line of sight or hide behind the wall, there is quite literally zero counterplay to him. You are quite literally just going to die unless you can hide behind a big ass rock of some kind. Trickster is just one of those killers who is brought to heal by the map, and specifically struggles on any map that isn't big, open, and has no walls. Trickster also has some decent perks, with his Hex being decent, Starstruck being amazing against survivors who hover over flashlights all game, and No Way Out being one of the best killer perks in the game. However, in terms of fun, he is absolutely miserable to play against since there's no counterplay, and quite frankly, it just feels like you can't do anything. Not to mention, it doesn't feel like the killer earns any hits, so it feels cheap, and from the killer's perspective, it's much the same. Nothing you do feels satisfying, and everyone I know who plays this killer mainly does so because they just want to see people suffer. Don't get me wrong, he isn't the worst killer to counter, and if you just hide behind walls and don't let him hit you, you can make his power useless. I would rather counter 100 ghouls than one Trickster, however. But why do I think Trickster is so bad? Well, in his lore, he's a K-pop artist and a serial killer who makes songs out of his victims' screams, which I find really cool. Although you wouldn't know that from his fucking chase music. I mean, I get it, it kind of resembles the screams of victims, but it could have been way more interesting. Yoo-Jin Lee was his partner and music producer, and I wish that there were more lines of the two interacting. Especially since them entering the fog happens moments before Trickster was going to kill her. I mean, we have Springtrap and fucking Nicolas Cage having unique voice lines. Voice lines specifically for the characters who released together? Oh no, we can't have that. Also, massive nitpick, Trickster's voice lines suck. I feel that they are way too basic, just saying things like good and alright. And again, you could really make the lore shine of his voice lines. 감사합니다. 내일은 이제 완벽해. 요즘아 데모로 굴리나 해. Anyways, this is just my thought on how to improve the atmosphere of Trickster, since voice lines can make a killer really shine in terms of personality. For Yoo-Jin Lee, let me know in the comments if you have any ideas for voice lines, but anyways, I'm gonna stop talking about Trickster and the voice lines. I got a bit off track there, I am sorry, I'm just very passionate about this as you can tell. But let's move on to the rest of the cast. So now we have the killer everyone knows was left in the dust, the pig. All I have to say is nerf the pig and you understand what I mean. But anyways, Pig's power is actually one of the most creative in my opinion, and does something I wish a lot of new killers would do, and that's change the main gameplay loop in some way. Playing against a pig is very different to playing against a standard, and it can be quite fun to verse a pig. She's up there as one of the more fun killers to verse, although playing her personally just isn't that interesting. Her power is simple. She has 4 head traps that she can put on survivors' heads, and if a gen gets completed, the trap activates, and if they don't take it off in time or try to leave the trial beforehand, the trap activates and the survivor is instantly killed. The second ability is a dash attack where you can crouch down and suddenly spring up to surprise survivors, which I have to admit is extremely fun, although I would argue that it's not only very weak, but pretty much gets no use because of how slow you are when crouching. To be honest, Pig's biggest weakness is that she's a stealth killer with no stealth. However, the head traps do allow her to be above most of the other stealth killers, but the head traps are also honestly all she has going for her, which is a real shame because the pig is one of my favourites of the horror movie cast just because of how creative it was to add a Saw character with a cool ability, but I guess they can't all be winners. Now Pig's perks aren't too bad. Make Your Choice and Surveillance are pretty decent perks, but not too great, and Hangman's Trick is so situational it's not even funny. Still, despite all of that, Pig is enjoyable to play, and if you like Ghostface, you will most likely enjoy the Pig, since in my opinion, they are a tad similar, just in the way they feel, but that's also a massive exaggeration. So now we have Legion, who is in my opinion the absolute easiest killer to understand, and probably the best beginner killer to start Dead by Daylight with, although Wraith is up there too. Now, what makes me say that? Well, their power is stab survivors and stab them faster. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Basically, whenever you go into your feral frenzy, you need to try and stab every survivor within a certain amount of time in order to instantly down the 5th person. Hitting people in this mode will make them have to mend, and that's the main reason people hate versing Legion, which is that he can get injured so freely and waste a lot of your time as you play Mending Simulator. Although, in my opinion, he's not that bad. There's definitely worse killers who do similar things. But anyways, Legion's power is very basic, and definitely can make him decently strong against those who have no idea how to counter him. Although, there are some pretty easy ways to counter him. One simply just being to split up, since if every survivor is on the opposite side of the map to each other, Legion won't be able to get a lot of use out of his power besides forcing 1 or 2 people to mend. Good survivors just will not heal against Legion, which may sound good for Legion, but honestly, it's pretty mid, since Legion has literally nothing to help him get that second hit, which can make him quite hard to use. However, if you have a fast-paced mind and love the idea of running around stabbing people, you'll definitely love this killer. His perks also aren't too bad either, with Discordance being pretty good and Iron Maiden being decent on certain killers, but otherwise they aren't the best. Overall, Legion's biggest weakness is that he can get that first hit extremely easily, but good survivors will make it very difficult to get the hits that actually matter, which makes him just not a strong killer. Onryo or Sadako is one of the most interesting killers on this list, since I believe the number one thing she has going for her is actually her passive effects with the condemned mechanic. Basically, certain things will make the survivor become condemned, which means that Sadako can just kill them, which is obviously strong, almost like a built-in Devour Hope, which makes you wonder, why is she so low on the list? Well, because it's very easy to counter this by just managing the tapes, which once you learn how to do, it's very easy to counter. Her phasing and demanifestation are kinda just there, and the TVs do give her decent map pressure, but honestly, she's just kinda there. I personally don't find a lot of satisfaction playing her, and playing against her is just kind of a mid experience. Her perks are decent, with Floods of Rage being a personal favourite of mine in a Scourgehook build, but honestly, I don't have that much to say about this killer. A lot of her strength comes in her passive effects, but she isn't very strong in any other department. Sure, she has decent map pressure, but she's not very good in chase, and she just can't compete with the other killers. So now we have the second killer from Dead by Daylight, and that is the Wraith. Dead by Daylight's first stealth killer, and this guy has had a bumpy ride, although right now, he's still weak, but he's a lot better than what he used to be. Wraith's power is very simple, being able to go invisible to move faster, kick gens and pallets quicker, and sneak up to survivors, and then uncloaking from his invisible mode allows him to hit survivors. This power seems super simple, because it is, but Wraith is able to create some immense pressure as he can get to objectives quickly and only really struggles in chase. I mean, put on Sloppy Butcher with a hit and run playstyle, and you have created a ton of pressure. Now, Wraith's perks are absolutely terrible, with Predator being the only semi-decent perk with killers like Nurse or Blight, because it can help you locate survivors if you get caught off guard by literally anything, but still it isn't that great. Wraith's strength is definitely there, and he can do some pretty intense stuff. Plus, he is arguably the best stealth killer for the fact that he's probably the best at getting right up to survivors, although besides the initial lunge he gets after he uncloaks, he doesn't really have anything else going for him. However, if you enjoy a hit and run playstyle or want a simple yet quite versatile killer, Wraith might be a good pick for you. I personally find him a lot of fun, though I do prefer a more active ability since chasing is my favourite part of this game. But you can't have it all, I guess. The Doctor is a surprisingly fun killer who is one of the most immersive killers to play against. His power is divided between his Static Blast and Static Shock. The Static Blast allowing him to locate nearby survivors, and his Static Shock preventing survivors from throwing pallets or vaulting windows. And every time you hit a survivor with the shock, their madness goes up, which is really good slowdown, as in tier 3, survivors can't even work on generators, which forces survivors to snap out of it. Doctor is surprisingly good at chasing, as preventing survivors from using resources is a very powerful effect. His perks are also pretty decent, although most perks work best in conjunction with others. Plus, he's a lot of fun. However, why is he so low on the list? Well, truth be told, he doesn't have the best map pressure, and like Legion, he thrives on grouped up survivors. That's not to say that Doctor is a bad killer, as he's perfectly capable of delivering a devastating match of survivors. However, Doctor's ability can be quite easily countered with effective looping, and he's not necessarily the easiest killer to play due to the shock having weird timing. However, you can perform very well as Doctor, and he is a lot of fun to use, especially if you are hearing every survivor scream with the Static Blast. So definitely a cool killer, and one I personally really enjoy. Bubba is an absolute icon, there is no denying it. Bubba's power is also very simple. He has a chainsaw and he can instantly down survivors with it. Not terrible, and a good Bubba is really scary. I mean, the phrase Bubba goes where Bubba wants exists for a reason. Although learning how to use his power effectively takes time, it's definitely satisfying to get hit as a bubba. Bubba also has the perk Barbecue and Chili, which is in my opinion one of the best killer perks in the entire game, allowing you to see the aura of any survivor who is 40 meters from the hook, which provides a lot of information. Bubba thrives on survivors who are out of position and is quite terrifying and is capable of some amazing things. Bubba can also tear through pallets quite easily, although if you get unlucky and get a hollow map, you will just get pallet after pallet thrown on you, and this killer becomes one of the most boring killers in the entire game to play. However, Bubba's biggest weakness is windows, which is why a lot of people will say that you must run Bamboozle on him, otherwise he will just simply be looped dry and be unable to down people with his chainsaw. Bubba, however, is one of the strongest killers in the basement specifically, and especially for strategies like camping or tunneling, since he can down people off the hook and the basement stupid easily. I'm not saying to camp or tunnel, but it is a strategy that you can use, and if you want to for some reason do that, Bubba is a good choice for that. Bubba is also a lot of fun in the right hands if you get good at him. You will have a lot of fun with this killer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's always fun, since Pallet Breaking Simulator isn't that fun, and he's overall just middle of the road and not that strong in certain situations, which is why he's here on the list. A horror icon that I personally know quite well, Chucky is a very interesting character, being the only killer with a permanent third camera view and just being a very small guy, which honestly, that's his power. His power is that he is 2 feet tall and it's impossible to see. Well, not impossible, but considering he's a stealth killer, he can catch survivors off guard quite easily. His ability consists of going into what's called hidey-ho mode, where you can become undetectable and can use the move known as slice and dice, where you can dash after a survivor and hit them, even being able to vault windows, which can make him pretty aggressive and oppressive in chase. Now that being said, he is a 4.4 meters per second killer, which is hard to tell from this angle, but he's slow, so map pressure is something that he is very lacking in, although stealth and chase is where he shines. His perks are also quite good, with Friends to the End being a very strong perk. Chucky is also one of the most annoying killers to listen to, since his voice lines are very whining, and while yes, it fits his character extremely well, I feel like he swears just for the sake of swearing sometimes. But nitpick aside, is he fun to play? Well, to play against? Hell no. He is very annoying to verse, and that's because of how small he is. And to play as? Well, it depends. If you enjoy a stealth playstyle and like jumpscaring people, then you may have some fun, but personally, I find Chucky quite boring. But that's just my take. So now we have a killer who is quite universally hated, and that's the Hag. Hag is simple. She's a trap killer who places mud traps that, once activated, you can teleport to hit and surprise survivors. Now Hag is one of those killers that is very rare, so countering the Hag is not something that a lot of people know how to do. And considering Hag's biggest strength is map pressure and more specifically camping, it's seen why she's so hated. She thrives on the hit and run tactic and she can be very oppressive. Her perks are also really good considering that they are all hexes, and she's also the killer who brought hexes into the game, so that's pretty cool. Now in chase, she's not that strong unless she places traps during chase, but honestly, even though it's not the best or most optimal thing a Hag can do, I think it's extremely fun to verse Hags that play like this, and it's fun to do so as Hag as well. I actually do find her quite fun to play as and against, although of course, if the Hag plays optimally or scummy and camps, that's no fun for anyone. However, overall, Hag just isn't that good in chase since she is a 4.4 meters per second killer, and she's overall just not that strong, or has any power that pushes her out of this tier. The Demogorgon is our next killer, and I'm so glad this killer wasn't removed permanently because I love him so much. Fun fact, but the Demogorgon was my first ever killer I played in Dead by Daylight, since I bought the game with the Stranger Things bundle. However, that doesn't mean I was good at him, and in fact, up until recently, I could not understand his power at all, which is crazy because his power is stupidly simple. He has 2 main parts of his power. He has 6 portals which he can place anywhere around the map and teleport between them, although once he uses the portal, survivors can see and remove his portals, and his more powerful ability and what brings him above everyone else so far, his Shred attack. Demogorgon's Shred is one of the more unique attacks, launching him towards the survivor and damaging anyone it touches, as well as destroying pallets and doors, which can completely shut down loops including Shack. Granted, it takes some time to learn how to use his power properly, but it's a very strong ability. Demogorgon actually used to be the standard of killer balancing, as he was a very simple killer with a low skill floor and, in my opinion, a semi-high skill ceiling, as a good Demogorgon player can really make you work to avoid being hit by his Shred. Demogorgon's perks are also really good, with Surge and Mindbreaker being absolute godsends. He is a very fun killer and a fast-paced killer that is capable of some crazy stuff. However, if that's the case, why is he so low? Well, truth be told, it's because he's been left behind. A lot of killers have very similar powers to Demogorgon, but just better. A good example being Springtrap with the doors. When Demogorgon uses the portal, he gains like 3 seconds of undetectable and has a cooldown on his portals, while Springtrap has no cooldown and 15 seconds of undetectable. His Shred is the only part of his power that's unique, and yet it highlights a huge issue with him, and that is, in my opinion, the camera lock. Whenever you use the Shred, whether you hit, miss, or smack into a wall, your camera is locked, making it very hard to move your camera, and it can just be very annoying. His stealth is completely pointless, as other killers just have better stealth, and his portals are pretty bad when it comes to teleport abilities. While yes, you can put them wherever you want, it comes with the downside of not being able to move them, and they can be destroyed. I would definitely say, despite all this, he's a stupidly fun killer and is one of my personal favourite killers to play, but he's definitely one of the weaker of those killers due to some of the hefty downsides. However, he still has a lot of cool tricks that you can use to make up for his weaknesses, and he has a lot of personality. Freddy Krueger, the killer that Dead by Daylight just can't seem to get right, because if I made this list based on the released versions, OG Freddy would be at the very bottom, as he was undoubtedly the single worst killer in Dead by Daylight history. But nowadays, he's not too bad. Not too strong, but not too weak. Freddy has a lot going for his actual power, including Dream Snares, Dream Pallets, and being able to teleport to generators. His perks are also pretty decent, but either situational or require a ton of setup. But goddamn, Blood Warden can be evil. But in terms of Freddy as a killer himself, he's kind of in the middle of the road. He's not terrible, and he has a bunch of tools to help him in chase, to help with map pressure and all that. But honestly, his abilities are pretty middle of the road and don't really accomplish anything substantial on their own. And in fact, even with everything, you still have to play well as Freddy to get value out of him. He's not bad, and he even is a bit fun, but honestly, he's just kinda there, and that's sad to see. Now, before when I said that Hag was the most hated killer in the game, I lied. That title probably belongs to this fat fuck, at least at the time of recording this video. Clown is arguably one of the most annoying killers to face, at least from the survivor side, since his haste bottles do make him feel quite powerless. However, despite the recent buffs, he still isn't that good. Pre-dropping pallets works amazing on him, and he's just not that strong. But what is his ability? Well, he has bottles that he can either throw at survivors or in the terrain, for 2 main effects. He has purple bottles which can slow survivors down, and yellow bottles which can speed both Clown and survivors up, with Clown able to get 17% haste quite easily, which is why some people have a problem with the current set of Clown. Clown's perks are arguably some of the best from any killer, with Bamboozle being a requirement for some killers, while Pop Goes the Weasel is one of the best slowdown perks, although Chlorophobia is a perk that exists. Clown's weakness is still map pressure, as he is the anti-loop killer, and isn't actually that good at getting across the map, even with that 17% haste. He thrives in chase, but the map pressure and the pre-drop strategy can make this killer just hot dirt, although he is kind of fun to play as, so I guess he does have that going for him. If you enjoy zoning survivors, you will like Clown. Just be prepared to get harassed in endgame chat. Old Man with a Gun, that is Deathslinger for you. Arguably one of the most basic powers, but also with a ton of potential. With this guy, you can snipe survivors and drag them towards you for easy hits. Deathslinger can completely shut down certain loops with his gun, and you can pull off some crazy shots. Deathslinger thrives on chases, but arguably does a better job than Clown. However, once again, pre-dropping works since you can't hit over pallets. You can drag players around unsafe loops, but safe loops like Shack, dropping that pallet makes you almost untouchable. His perks are pretty good, Deadman Switch and Gearhead are fantastic. However, that doesn't change the fact that Deathslinger just isn't that good of a killer. He has great chase potential, but the fact that he's 4.4 meters per second and he's not that very good at map pressure makes him unable to go any higher. Our first Resident Evil character, the Nemesis, and despite the fact he's just a goofy little guy, he is quite fun. He has a tentacle that can infect survivors and zombies around the map. The zombies and tentacles act like an extra hit state, and honestly, Nemesis is quite oppressive in chase. Once again though, a lack of map pressure, although sometimes his zombies make up for this, but that is very RNG dependent. His perks are pretty fantastic, Lethal Pursuer being a god tier perk and Eruption being pretty good too, though Hysteria isn't as good, but it's not bad. Nemesis's tentacle can be extremely evil and can get you some completely unfair hits, since you can drag it to smack into survivors who aren't in the tentacle's path. You can also use this tentacle or whip to destroy pallets, which is much faster than breaking it yourself. However, once again, the lack of map pressure makes Nemesis really struggle in certain situations and on certain maps, which means I can't place him any higher. However, he's a ton of fun and I highly recommend trying him out, especially if you enjoy the more intimate close quarter chases that Nemesis thrives on. So if you follow my channel, you know that I'm a bit of a FNAF guy, so you may be curious about my thoughts on Springtrap, and considering he's right smack bang in the middle of the road, I have some thoughts about how good he is in DBD. For his power, it's divided into two sections. One is the security doors, which you can use to teleport around the map similar to Demogorgon, except you don't choose where to place his portals. However, you do get a ton of stealth from him. The second part of his power is the Fire Axe, which, if it hits, will stick to the survivor and deal a health state. Regardless of if you miss or not, you can recall your Fire Axe if you choose. While the axe is in a survivor, if you get close enough, you can grab the survivor and instantly pick up the survivor, as well as avoid flashlights if the game decides not to bug. Yeah, this isn't impacting his strength at all, but Springtrap has been bugging like crazy recently. Get on that please. Anyways, Springtrap is a 4.4 meters per second killer, but has a cool micro play where if he doesn't have his axe, he moves at the normal 4.6 meters per second. He can also grab survivors who travel through the same doors as him. However, he can be revealed to every survivor if they look at him on the camera, which is an insane downside which coordinated survivors can use to bully Springtrap. And although any killer will struggle against a fully organized team of survivors, it's noticeable on Springtrap. Springtrap's perks are also pretty bad, with the only good one being Phantom Fear, which can help you find the survivors that hide all game. But overall, Springtrap is a very fun killer, probably one of the most fun killers to play. However, he unfortunately has those few downsides, which makes him not the greatest killer since his chase potential just isn't as high as other killers. In my opinion, Springtrap is the new middle of the road killer. Xenomorph is a killer I unfortunately have quite the history with, but what do I think of him as a killer? Well, despite the fact that I got my ass handed to me by him in the 5Gens tournament, I actually think that Xenomorph is only slightly better than Springtrap overall. Xenomorph has the same map pressure as Springtrap, but he has slightly better, or dare I say uncountable anti-loop with his tail. Don't get me wrong, there are ways to dodge the tail, but it's not necessarily a very easy ability to counter, since it's not like a Huntress hatchet where you can just see it coming. Xenomorph's tail is the main reason that they are so high on the list, considering I just think that Xenomorph is overall a better Springtrap, since I think the turrets aren't as good at countering zero as say looking at Springtrap on the cameras is for Springtrap. But anyways, this again puts Xena at the middle of the road with decent map pressure and decent anti-loop, but they are just kind of decent. Their perks are okay, but nothing too crazy in my opinion. Overall, I don't have too much to say about this killer, and honestly, they are just decent to play as and against. Nothing too special in my opinion, kinda just there. At the number 20 spot, we have the Huntress, who is actually one of my favourite killers in the game, if not my favourite killer. And there are a few reasons for that. Huntress's ability is arguably one of the most simple. You have 7 hatchets that you can throw, if they hit a survivor, they deal a health state, and you can reload hatchets from lockers. This simple ability, however, doesn't change the Huntress's strength, as she is definitely stronger than everyone else before. When it comes to range attacks, she is arguably one of the best, since with the right add-ons, you can machine gun or snowball, which makes her absolutely OP when it comes to the basement. Distance doesn't mean much when she can hit you from across the map, however this comes with Huntress's biggest weakness. And that is, in my opinion, player ability. Obviously this is the case for most killers, in that if you're bad, you won't get anywhere. But it's extremely noticeable on Huntress, since her whole power requires you to be good and to hit your shots. And considering how wonky the hatchet hitboxes are, you can sometimes just get screwed. However, sometimes the survivors get screwed as well. Her hatchets can either get the most unfair hits known to man, or you can dead on hit someone and the game just says no. But that's a ping and DBD issue. I mean, I do play, Australian servers. Anyways, she is however really good at those hatchets, making her quite a scary killer, with line of sight blocking being very essential and all reading perks helping her like crazy. However, she also has the downside of being a 4.4 meters per second killer, which does make her quite bad in normal chases if she has no hatchet, and she's pretty bad at map traversal. Which, I will say, even though there's an add-on that allows her to move at 4.6 meters per second if she has no hatchet, Springtrap gets that base kit, though I do understand why that's the case. Anyways, all this means that she can struggle to get map pressure, making certain slowdown perks like Eruption pretty terrible. And speaking of perks, Huntress has some of the worst teachable perks in the entire game, with the only semi-decent one being at the Huntress Lullaby, but it's a Hex Totem so it can get cleansed, and the effect isn't even all that good. However, despite all that down talk, why do I say she's one of my favourites? Well again, if you land your shots, she's a very good killer, and arguably she's one of the most fun killers in this game. Plus, she's very easy to understand, and she has an insane high skill ceiling, which means you have to work to get good, but it's fun and addicting to get better since she's so satisfying. Overall, while she's still only really a B tier killer due to her lack of map pressure and weird physics with the hatchets at times, she's one of the most fun killers in my opinion, and she is definitely popular for a reason. Now Pinhead, unfortunately I can't say too much about because I have never, nor will I ever be able to play them, unless someone gives me $500 so I can buy the Pinhead Steam code. But anyways, this footage is my friend Flooploop's playing, who you should definitely go check out. But anyways, from what I know about versing Pinhead, he's decently strong, with a very good anti-live ability and his main power, the passive map pressure with the box. The box will make survivors go solve it or deal with 500 chains spawning as you are trying to do stuff. And of course, solving the box makes Pinhead see you if looking in your direction, allowing him to teleport you with the funny line. Obviously, this guy absolutely stomps solo queue survivors, however against a team that knows what they're doing, he's still just decent. And he definitely doesn't have the same level of anti-loop or map pressure as some of the other killers have. And honestly, that's all I can say about him. If someone gives me $500, I'll remake this video. The Knight is a very interesting character, as he has a very simple yet complicated power. Knight has 3 guards that he can summon out, and they all do different things. The Carnifex destroys generators and patrols, the Jailer hunts for longer, and the Assassin chases faster and inflicts deep wound. Knight's strength comes from chases, as it's very easy for him to place the survivors into completely uncountable situations, which makes them get hit no matter what, and it's not uncommon to get double stomped or tag teamed by a Knight. He also has a bit of map pressure, as you can have one guard chase one survivor while focusing on another, and this makes him quite oppressive. His 3 perks are amazing, with Nowhere to Hide probably being one of the best killer perks in the entire game. Now for Knight's weaknesses, it's pretty much just map pressure. Yes, the guards can be useful, but honestly I don't think that they are all that good. Plus, some maps Knight can really struggle on, but overall he's not too bad. In terms of fun, he's fine, he's honestly kind of boring, but if you enjoy controlling different attributes of chase and using different guards for different things, you might enjoy Knight. So now we have probably one of the most divided in terms of versing versus playing as, and for me, that killer is the Plague. I absolutely despise playing against Plague, since the sound of survivors vomiting constantly makes my skin crawl. However, unfortunately, the number one counter to the Plague is not cleansing, so you will have to deal with the sound of them vomiting, which I think if you remove that sound, no one would ever cleanse against Plague, besides the fact that you just don't want to be injured. But anyways, Plague's ability is simple. She throws up on survivors until they are injured, broken and hindered. Then, if they cleanse at a fountain, you get access to the Corrupt Purge, which is by far the best move in the entire game, able to down an entire team in like 10 seconds, if they are all right next to each other. I'm not exaggerating, that's a possibility. However, whether or not this will actually happen in a game is another story. But this move is still amazing, and the general slowdown of the infection is a pretty good power as well. It makes Plague decently strong, as you can basically keep survivors injured or provide you with an insanely powerful ability, which is similar to Legion, but the survivor isn't forced to deal with it by mending, so you will just be debuffed. Although again, I still hate versing this killers. Her perks are good, with Corrupt Intervention being an absolutely amazing slowdown, although if you're good you get punished, so it's whatever. Now, again, like most killers, Plague's biggest weakness is map pressure, since she has to walk everywhere. But still, Plague is a very good killer, and is also quite fun to play as. So now we have one of the most fun killers in the entire game, and that killer is Albert Wesker from Resident Evil. A very simple power. He can dash, grab survivors, and slam them or throw them, which will infect them, and if they don't spray themselves, then they will instantly be picked up if grabbed, and 4% hindered until they fix themselves. Wesker is a very simple killer, but this simplicity actually makes him quite strong, as his infection is a lot more devastating than Nemesis' one, and the power is also more dangerous, as it can grab you from far away if you're not paying attention. Wesker's dash makes him extremely dangerous, as he is capable of doing some absolutely insane stuff, and most of his weaknesses come down to certain loops taking advantage of the way he dashes. His perks are also just fine. Not much to say about them, to be honest. I don't find much use for them, but maybe you guys can tell me in the comments your ideas. But anyways, Wesker is a ton of fun, and he's a pretty strong killer with a really high skill ceiling, so do with that as you will. Although I don't love the way he plays, despite the fact I really want to, Pyramid Head is pretty damn strong. Pyramid Head has two main parts of his power, mainly being the Trails of Torment and the Cages. Pyramid Head can drag trails around the map, which will torment survivors if they step in them, as well as shoot out a range attack, which can hit survivors through walls. Put on Iron Mole ears for amazing effects. The second power is that if the survivor is tormented, you can send them to a cage instead of a hook, which basically means that any perks that require you to be placed on a hook, like War Maker or Resurgence, won't work, which is a pretty powerful effect in this meta. He also has pretty good anti-loop and not actually bad map pressure with his trails, and the fact that survivors can spawn on the opposite side of the map to where the survivor was down, which can be pretty disorienting for survivors. And although he doesn't have amazing perks except for trail, which is funny as, he honestly is a really cool and powerful killer. Although personally I find him a bit too clunky to play as, however if you enjoy trick shots and predicting survivors' movement, you'll really enjoy this killer. The Unknown is a killer I really enjoy playing, and I would say is a fan favourite for a reason. He is a very powerful killer with a pretty cool kit. He has two main attributes to his power. The first one being the UVX, which is a projectile which can weaken survivors, and if they are hit again while weakened, they take a damage state. On top of that, the projectile is slightly different than most, where you want to bounce it off a wall rather than directly hit the survivor, which can make for some really cool shots. The second part of his power is the hallucinations or projections around the map, which he can teleport to pretty much instantly, which is another insane ability of his. Survivors can dispel these quote-unquote husks, but honestly, that doesn't really do him any harm. And in fact, if you interrupt this either by teleporting to it or just anything really, the survivor gets weakened, which I should say, the only way for a survivor to remove the weakened status is to look at you directly, which means they have to be near you, which is, always a good thing for killers. His perks are pretty mixed, but Unforeseen is an amazing perk, and honestly, he is a very strong killer, as I view him as a mix between Springtrap and Demogorgon, but with a lot of unique attributes that make him quite a strong killer. The ability to teleport at will to a hallucination is insanely powerful for chasers, as you can surprise survivors very, very easily with some smart plays. Going for long shots can be insanely powerful. Overall, he's quite strong with his UVX and hallucinations, and he's very fun to play as and against, and you'll definitely enjoy him if you want to go for insane shots and tight loops and surprise survivors. Houndmaster is one of the more interesting killers in Dead by Daylight, as they are very easily in the A tier of killers when they decide to work, since, as we know, Houndmaster is one of the most bugged killers in the entire game. Maybe not the most bugged killer, but still bugged. However, when the dog called Snug works properly, Houndmaster is an absolute beast, as the dog makes for a very good anti-loop, while the search mode allows Houndmaster to make very good distance across the map. Her perks, while not amazing, have some uses, with Jagged Compass being very good on a lot of killers with perks like Pain Resonance. Houndmaster is also surprisingly fun, as being able to cut loops short and play 2 killers at once is pretty cool, although there's one who does this better, but we'll get to them. Houndmaster is definitely carried by the insane anti-loop potential and the ability to pressure different parts of the map at once with the dog, although there are definitely killers who can do similar things but better. Oni is, and always has been, a very strong killer, and a killer who really thrives on injured survivors as well as forcing survivors to heal. His power is simple. When a survivor is injured, they drop blood orbs that Oni can collect to go into a rage mode where he can perform a demon dash, allowing him to sprint across the map at insane speeds and instantly down survivors. In terms of killers that can insta-down or have insta-down built into their kit, Oni is definitely one of the strongest and can perform some insane shots on survivors who are caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And survivors can unintentionally cause Oni to remain powerful for a very long time. While Oni's perks are really bad, he himself is super powerful, although he does have one major drawback, and that is survivors being good. If Oni never hits a survivor or the survivors heal effectively, he quite literally does not have a power, which can make him very bad on certain maps, although that's also just the case of being in his main power. However, despite that, Oni is insanely powerful and is definitely one of the stronger killers in Dead by Daylight. If you enjoy a hit and run playstyle and being weak at the start but setting up your success for later on, as well as dash killers, Oni is a very appealing pick. And although me personally, I much prefer facing an Oni to playing one, as I find him quite boring, I can definitely see the fun factor, and the fact he's so strong is definitely a massive help. Now, some killers in this game have very simple powers, and some have more complicated powers, and Vecna is a perfect example of a complicated power, with him having 4 modes: Fly, Skull, Mage Hand, and Seeking Survivor. I won't go into how every single part of his power works because we would be here all day and this video already is really long, but what you do need to know is that Vecna is the definition of the jack of all trades. He has a lot of abilities, but is always outshined by other killers with similar powers. However, he does have a large amount of abilities that make him very versatile and unpredictable. The survivor side of his power has to do with treasure chests, which do have a 1 in 20 chance to just injure survivors, but again, unless you hit them with your all-seeing orb, they can get certain perks to counter each one of your abilities. In terms of fun, if you personally enjoy the complexity of juggling multiple abilities, you will definitely enjoy Vecna. Although personally, I prefer simple killers with fleshed out powers, so Vecna isn't my favourite. Although, I know I'm in the minority. Vecna's perks are honestly quite lacking, and honestly, Vecna's biggest weakness is just the chests, and his abilities aren't very good on their own, making them very easy to counter by themselves. The skulls can be crouched over, the Mage Hand gives you an extra pallet, and he can't hit you when flying. However, despite that, the combination of moves in the hands of a good player can make Vecna terrifying, and he definitely deserves to be where he is. And now we are getting into the top 10 best killers, so if you've been enjoying this video so far, be sure to subscribe to help us hit 70,000 subscribers by the end of the week, and 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and let me know your favourite killer in the comments below. Also, just a quick reminder that in November, I'm hosting a Dead by Daylight charity tournament with a ton of YouTubers on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of November, so be sure to check that out. But anyways, let's get into number 10. Spirit used to be the second best killer in the game at one point in time, but nowadays she sits here at number 10. But before I discuss her power, she has some pretty decent perks, with Spirit Fury being insane. She is also, in my opinion, extremely boring to play since her power is just going faster but she can't see survivors. But anyways, onto her power and strength. Like I said before, her power is literally, she moves quite fast, survivors can't see her, but can hear her, and Spirit can do the same to the survivors, making her the OG 50-50 killer, which can make for some absolutely insane mind games. Now, that being said, while she does really well in chase, she doesn't have the best map pressure. I mean, she can get from one side to the other very quick, but it's not an amazing move. However, her chase is honestly one of the most effective, especially for survivors who have no idea how to counter her. But honestly, there's not much else to say. She just isn't as good as she used to be, and she's a lot easier to counter now, but she's still insanely strong. With arguably the best set of teachable perks in the entire game with Pain Resonance and Grim Embrace, Artist is a very strong killer. Their power is birds. Yeah, I'm serious. But they can launch crows across the map which can swarm survivors and make them vulnerable to more birds. This power is extremely good in both chases but also for map pressure, which is insanely powerful, and you can use your birds to trap survivors in a loop or get survivors off of generators. Now, Artist is a ton of fun to play and has a lot of potential, which makes them quite a strong killer. Although honestly, there's not much else to talk about with them. The only real weakness is that you can dispel the birds by jumping into a locker, but otherwise, they don't really have that many downsides besides maybe not having the best map pressure of all time. But they are still very oppressive overall and are very hard to counter. They are just stronger than everyone else before, and they aren't as strong as the rest of the cast. So let's get into them. Dracula is honestly a fan favorite, and I can see why. Take Vecna with the jack of all trades mentality and make him the master of all trades. Dracula has 3 forms. Bat form, he can move across the map and teleport to windows but can't see survivors and can do it faster than Spirit. The wolf form, that has 2 dashes and is in third person, semi-similar to Wesker and Chucky, except the wolf form can also destroy pallets like Demogorgon, which makes it a 3-in-1 power. And finally, human form, with Hellfire similar to Pyramid Head. Dracula has a lot going for him. He's extremely powerful, although his perks are just fine. Dracula can pull off some insane moves, as he can basically cover all bases, and be anywhere he needs to be, although he is a bit tricky to learn, and in my opinion, he's just a bit boring. But again, I don't like complicated killers, and I don't find Dracula interesting. But he is a popular choice for a reason. He's strong and he's versatile, which earns him the number 8 spot on our list. So here we have arguably the single most hated killer in the entire game at the time of recording this video, and that is Kanganaki from Tokyo Ghoul. And for why he's the killer, I don't know, but I guess it makes sense. Anyway, his power is pretty busted. He can launch himself across the map with his tentacles and latch onto players and injure them for free, making him enraged and able to vault windows and over pallets really fast, cut you off or go around loops. He's very tough to counter and chase, his map pressure is insane, and he has the free hit and mending requirement like Legion. Sounds like a recipe for success. Now Ghoul isn't completely uncounterable and he does struggle in certain loops, as distance means absolutely nothing for this killer. While his perks are mid, this killer is capable of some crazy, completely unfair hits just because of the fact that he can latch on for free and injure so freely. If you enjoy making people suffer, or more likely, launching yourself across the map, you 100% enjoy this killer. I do think he's a ton of fun to play as, but I do also find him a bit too simple and too effective, kind of feeling like I'm not accomplishing anything. But anyways, Ghoul is insanely strong and there's no denying it. But he does have to work harder for that second hit, but not as much as say Legion did. But this is nothing compared to the next killer on our list. Twins are technically 2 killers in 1, with Charlotte being the big one and Victor being the small one, or, you know, the baby, even though he's not a baby, but anyways. Victor can detach from Charlotte, crawl really fast, and launch himself either onto or down survivors, as well as trapping them in lockers and giving killer instinct to Charlotte. Charlotte is just an M1 killer, but Victor is absolutely insane. Now granted, if Victor misses his pounce, the survivors do have a chance to kick him and disable him for a while, but this honestly doesn't really do much. Twins are basically Houndmaster, but more powerful, and while like Houndmaster, twins can be insanely bugged, I actually find them really fun, but again, they are also really powerful. Now the best way to counter twins is to double up to deal with Victor, but even then, there's only so much you can do if you get caught in bad positions. And on top of that, twins have decent perks overall. Victor can also get some incredibly dumb hits, and it's very hard for survivors to dodge, so if you play semi well, you can get injuries for free. The twins is very much on the line of between A and S tier, with the only reason they aren't higher is because of the bugs. But now we are getting into the top 5 best killers, which in my opinion are either the very high A tier or bottom S tier, with the top 3 just being straight up S tier killers. So let's get into it. So now we have the last of the insta-down killers, and also the first one to be added into the game. Hillbilly has been through it all. From being a fairly balanced but fun killer, which the community loved, to being nerfed into the ground for no reason, for now being the killer we all know and love today. Billy has been through it all. He has a chainsaw which he can use to dash across the map and down survivors that collide with his chainsaw, and if he uses his chainsaw enough, it goes into overdrive mode, where you can dash faster. He has some of the best map pressure in the entire game, since being able to instantly down you from across the map is horrifying. And he has some insane chase potential, although he does have a slight weakness in this area, specifically with indoor maps and again, windows. Please put on Bamboozle. However, a good Hillbilly can deal with it, and in fact, the most difficult thing about Hillbilly is that in my humble opinion, he is by far the single most difficult killer to learn in this entire game. However, he does have an insanely high skill ceiling and is capable of some absolutely insane things. Even though I absolutely suck at Hillbilly, as you can tell from this background footage, he is honestly a ton of fun, and I imagine working to get good at him would be a joy, even if he has a clunky camera. Plus, his perks are really good in my opinion. Enduring being very good, Tinker being underrated, and although Lightborn is a meme perk, it still has its uses. And all this makes Hillbilly an absolutely insane killer, with some of the best, most amazing map pressure in the entire game. Although, in my opinion, there is one killer that exceeds Hillbilly with map pressure. Larry is a gem, and arguably the best killer when it comes to map pressure. He has biopods he can place around the map to scan for survivors, and latch a bubble onto them, which you can use to directly teleport to them. He also has an overdrive mode where you can tank pallets. Now this power seems simple, but it is by far the most complicated power in the entire game, and that's where 95% of his difficulty comes from, which just isn't for me, because again, I prefer the more simple killers, but I can see the appeal for sure. Being able to pressure the map at the same time you're in chase with someone is an insanely powerful ability, and I imagine any good Singularity player would take advantage of this. His perks are okay, but aren't too bad, like machine learning, which can make for some very funny moments on certain killers. But anyways, survivors also have EMPs which they can use to counter the Singularity by destroying biopods and bubbles on their back. Although this is only temporary and is most effectively used if you're carrying them around, which most survivors just won't do. Meaning Larry has some insane map pressure and can just get hit after hit after hit, with not much the survivors can do about it. He's especially good in the endgame as you can hold a 3-gen very easily as well as hold the exit gates for a long time. However, what holds Larry back is the EMPs and the fact he does have counterplay, mainly pre-dropping and angling yourself so Singularity spawns on the opposite side from you from like a pallet for instance, but he's still really good. However, the next 3 killers on our list have almost no counterplay, which is what makes them so good. So let's get into it. Taking home the bronze, we have the brand new killer added to Dead by Daylight, the Krasue. A demon woman that can take her head and organs off her body and chase you. Sounds fucking terrifying, and that's because it is. And adding to that is the absolutely insanely broken power she has. The Krasue has 2 main parts to her power, the head form and the body form. In the body form, you can shoot an infection at the survivors which will make them leeched as well as your basic attack. While leeched, survivors are hindered and are vulnerable to the head form, where you have 3 main abilities if you don't count the third person camera. You can fly really fast to catch up with survivors, you can whip them with your intestines, which is the really broken part since she can do it from so far away. Like seriously, this lunge is actually insane. And on top of all of it, she can vault pallets and they can immediately attack afterwards, which makes them one of the most difficult killers to counter and chase, because they buffed an already strong killer. Now, the survivors can recover from leech by using mushrooms, but that only does so much. Krasue's chase potential is insane, and on top of that, she's fairly easy to use and she's a lot of fun. Her perks are decent, with Ravenous actually being one of my new favourites since 60 seconds of exposed can be absolutely amazing on certain killers. Overall, what holds her back is that she doesn't have the best map pressure of all time. Don't get me wrong, she's fast, and she does have a bit of it from the Lich effect and the flying head zombie, but she's not very good in that department. But she is still overall an absolutely terrifyingly strong killer who deserves the number 3 spot. So now we have the Blight, who I'm sure none of you are surprised to see up here. Before I explain the obvious, Blight has some good perks, with Undying being a requirement for Hex builds, but anyways, Blight's power is simple. He has 5 dashes where by slamming into a wall he can continue dashing. Very simple power, but this power is absolutely insane, with him having one of the highest skill ceilings of any killer, able to pull off some absolutely insane plays with flicks and turns, great positioning and mind games, able to make this killer an absolute godsend in chase. And in map pressure as well, since he can get to the other side of the map extremely quickly. While this killer does struggle from smaller unsafe loops, with not much around them, he's still insane and definitely deserves the silver medal. He's a ton of fun, and if you enjoy dashing around the map and hitting people, you'll definitely enjoy Blight. He's an absolute joy. So now you may be asking yourself, who is the number 1 killer? Who gets the gold medal? Who is the best killer in Dead by Daylight? You already fucking know who it is. And at the number 1 spot, we have the most obvious choice imaginable. The Nurse is, and will most likely always be, the strongest killer in the game. The reason? Well, quite simple. You know the game, like the loops, the pallets, the windows, all that stuff. Well, Nurse says fuck you and ignores all of it. Her power is that she can teleport through walls. And yes, the strongest killer in the game can phase through walls, which is just insane. If you are playing against a good Nurse, you are straight up dead and there's basically nothing you can do. Now, her perks are good and she's honestly quite fun, although she does play very differently from every other killer. No surprises there, but she is the slowest killer in the game, with her teleporting and blinking basically being used for map traversal as well as chase, but that doesn't make her any less powerful, and instead makes her all the more terrifying, which makes her easily the best killer in the entire game. And there we have it, every single killer ranked from worst to best. Now again, this is just my opinion, so don't hate me, but here's a tier list highlighting how fun I found every single killer as I played every single one for this video. Although a couple will be changed in the coming weeks, I'm sure. I was quite surprised to say the least of which kills I found fun. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and be sure to check out this video on screen here, since YouTube thinks that you will like it. Thanks for sticking around guys, and I hope you enjoy this video.